Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. If you've ever made the mistake of going on Reddit, just in general, and checking out one of the numerous writing related subs, you will find a lot of silly questions being asked. Chief among the silliness is a variation of the question, am I allowed to do blank? Or is it okay for me to do blank?
Blank? Blank? You're not looking at the big picture!
And I'm here to say that the answer is unequivocally yes. But before I talk about that today, let's get through this week's writing update. For the week of July 14th to the 20th, I wrote a total of 3,756 words, which brings the project total to 124,403 words. Obviously, I was quite a bit under the 5,000 word goal for the week, mostly because this was an up and down week with me writing only every other day due to various reasons. And unfortunately, this current week has been going pretty slowly as well, but I'm gonna do my best to reach that 130,000 word mark by the end of Sunday. I'll actually be traveling this upcoming week as well, so I may or may not post a video come next Saturday. It all just depends on how much I'm able to write while I'm away and what else I may need to prioritize around the house once I return, because I will be going back to work full time after this vacation. But I'll be on a plane for a decent chunk of time on Monday and Thursday, and my options will basically be to write or to read, so let's hope I can get a good chunk of writing done that way. Anyway, on to the topic of today's video, making fun of strangers on the internet. I'm honestly not super inspired about making anything in particular this week, so I'm gonna try something different, because in my never-ending quest to dish out hard truths about writing and demystify the writing process, I figured I'd torture myself a little bit by going through some random posts I encountered in the writing spheres of Reddit this week and give some responses. And as I was saying at the start of the video, the internet at large, and Reddit more specifically in this case, is full of questions from what I assume are new, inexperienced, and or insecure writers who come to the internet to seek validation from strangers about their writing. Sometimes that's people wanting to know if what they're writing is any good, which, let's be real, usually it's gonna be no, but you have to persevere and continue writing. You also might find questions asking how to actually write a given scene or idea, which is frankly even worse. And other times you just get some really weird questions. So let's take a look at some of these. As a new writer, should I really start by short novels? I plan to be a writer and I already have book ideas. I want to develop one of them, but as a new writer, I ask myself if I should start by short stories. But I don't want to rush character development or the theme. Help me, please. Thank you for your advices. Okay, so I'm actually gonna give this person a little bit of grace here because this is actually a topic I've heard throughout college and even grad school, where the more literary fiction type of writers will tell you that yes, you need to start with short stories or novellas before you progress to writing novels. Personally, I disagree with that advice because I do not like writing short stories because I don't like to be constrained by that. My imagination cannot be contained. So when I started writing books, I jumped in with a goal of 150,000 words for my first book, and that took me about 2.5 years to write, and it was pretty bad by the time I was finished. But once I did it, I understood how to actually take my ideas into an outline, into writing a story, and see the whole thing through the process, through to fruition. So personally, I would say, write whatever story length you think you can do, and you can revise it once it's finished. And if that's 50,000 words, if that's 150,000 words, if it's 5,000 words, that's totally fine. I've said before that realistically, the number of ideas that you want to accomplish and tackle, and characters you want to write about, and themes you want to discuss, that will really determine the story length. So don't get hung up on, should I start with a short story, then a novella, then a novel. Help with adding storylines. Hey all, I'm a relatively new and inexperienced writer, and I'm coming into a bit of an interesting problem. So I have my basic story outline, and I have a bunch of scenes clearly in my mind, but I feel my story is too short whenever I look for random generators to kinda jog my creativity or give me a starting idea. All I get are starting plot hooks or writing prompts. Does anyone have any good examples of random scene or event generators? Okay, so obviously here's the problem. You should not be going to the internet to find random scene or event generators to help you write your book. Any scene that you put in your book has to be connected to your characters, your overall plot, and your themes. It's not good enough to take a random idea from the internet and then try to plug that into your book, because it's not actually coming from your own vision. Obviously, I'm glad the person put up front that he or she is new and inexperienced, because that's very obvious here. So once again, don't do this sort of thing. Don't look for random scene generators or events. Just write what you can write. or spend some time brainstorming and idea creating on your own, but don't go to the internet for this sort of thing. How much words is ideal? Hi, I am writing a story and it's a thriller genre. I have kind of finished the story and it's 29,000 words. Is that a good word count for a novel? I do have idea to expand it and maybe make it close to 50k words. Should I do it? Or is 29k words fine? Okay, so obviously starting off here, 29,000 words is not a novel, that's a novella. So to answer the question, no, that is not a good word count for a novel. And beyond that, if you have ideas to turn your story from 29,000 words into 50,000 words, and you feel those ideas are worth doing and will make your story better and flesh out your characters and your themes and your plot, then yes, you should absolutely do that. At the same time, 29,000 words might be fine as well. The problem with this sort of question is that no one has any idea how to tell you yes or no that this word count is fine because no one's read the story yet. And so this is the kind of case where if you're really looking for targeted feedback, you have to actually get beta readers to read your whole story and give you feedback on, hey, I need to know more about this character or this plot point, this piece of the setting, etc. Without knowing how the story actually goes, no one can actually give you feedback about whether the length is good or bad. But also, the length is neither good nor bad. Length is neutral. It depends on the story that you're trying to tell and the whole scope of the thing. Tips on making the plot make sense. It's like my storyline goes to point A, but then I get a new idea and then I scratch it all together and I end up writing a whole new story. Crying emoji. Like, okay, for example, my story is kind of based on the War of the Roses, similar to Got, but like it's so much happening, including huge plot holes, all at once that I don't even know where to start. What tips do you guys have that might help? Oh my gosh. Okay, so obviously if you're coming to the internet with this question, it means you don't have an actual story to write and you just have a scatter point of ideas that don't make any coherent sense in a plot. And so you need to take a step back from the actual writing. The first big issue is that if you think there's all these plot holes happening, then you have to start thinking about your characters and the actions they're taking, and if those actions are the things that are creating plot holes, or do you have plot points in mind that you want to happen, but you don't know how to string them together yet, and that creates plot holes. A plot hole is really just something that a writer hasn't thought through thoroughly. For example, taking Game of Thrones actually, plot holes abound in the later seasons especially, particularly 7 and 8 because they're trash. In season 7 specifically, one of the later episodes has Jon and the group of super friends going up north past the wall to find something, I don't even remember anymore. While they're on their journey, they get in danger and they have the brilliant plan to summon Daenerys for aid with dragons to airlift them out. Now here is the big problem. They are north of the wall. They send a raven to Dragon's Reach, which is way down south, and somehow that raven gets to Daenerys within like a few hours, and then Daenerys is able to fly north of the wall within a few hours, because all of this happens within like a day. That's a glaring plot hole because the previous seasons established that Westeros is much bigger than that. A raven could not fly to Dragon's Reach within half a day. Even a dragon can't fly that same distance within half a day. The problem we ran into is that the showrunners were hacks and they wanted the plot point of Jon and his friends north of the wall and the plot point of Daenerys saving them with the dragons, but they didn't really know how to mesh them together because, again, they're hacks and they didn't really care. So anyway, if you have plot holes, it means you haven't thought through from the character lens specifically what kind of decisions they're making and actions they're taking. And what you need to do then is really take a step back, thinking, this is where I want things to go, this is where I want things to start. What are some logical choices that will lead from starting point to end point? Or thinking backwards, if this is how it ends, what choices led up to that ending that would then come back to that starting point? So the tips that I would have to help this person is basically just sit down and brainstorm and don't worry about any actual writing just yet because you're not ready. Looking for advice on executioning without flopping. I'm trying out writing. I have concepts in mind, but what crosses it is the question. How do I execute these concepts very well without butchering it? I don't have a way to help this person because I don't know what concepts this person's worried about butchering. And this is the other issue. If you're going to post questions online asking for advice, be specific. You can't be general because no one knows how to help you if you don't give them something to work off of. So I guess blanket advice is don't worry about it because you probably will butcher some stuff that you're writing, and it depends on the concepts that you're writing as well. If you're writing a story about friendship, it's a pretty easy theme to get across, particularly if you're writing like a kid's book. If a concept that you're writing about is socioeconomic inequality, that's gonna be a lot harder, and you probably will butcher it because it's a lot more complicated than people make it out to be. So realistically, the important part is you're gonna butcher it. It's okay. That's the whole point of writing. So just start writing, and once you butcher it, recognize why you've butchered it and think about what you can do to make it better. Writing female characters as a male writer. Many people seem to have conflicted feelings about men writing female characters in their stories, especially if it is about the main character of a story. While I have tried to think on my own about what could be the cause of this, what do you think are the reasons for this? Also, what are things men should pay attention to while writing a woman? What are tropes/mistakes that often get made regarding this topic that a male writer should avoid? What are, in your opinion, some prime examples of a writer doing in wrong? Or some examples where it was done right, in your opinion? I think this TUIC is very interesting, and I would be happy to read some thoughts. I'm going to give this person some credit about asking for examples done right, because this is a problem amongst the chronically online in which they think men cannot write women. Also, spoiler alert, there are plenty of women who cannot write men either. Also, there are men who are bad at writing men. There are women who are bad at writing women. It's almost like your talent as a writer is not defined by your sex. My actual advice for this person would be to not worry about it. Write your characters as people first, and depending on what you're doing in a scene, think about what their sex means for their lens. For example, if you have a fight happening, men and women do fight differently when it comes to physical violence. And realistically, nowadays, you can just look up videos on the internet to see some ideas of how those things go. For women, there might be a lot more hair pulling, for example, than you would find with men. Men are also going to have a specific weak point that women don't have, so that could also come into play in a fight. But more specifically, what I think is the cause of a negative perception about men writing women is, once again, chronically online people on the internet. And obviously there are bad examples. I'm not going to deny that there aren't male writers who get really hung up on certain anatomical pieces of a woman. But once again, let's not deny there are also women who get hung up on anatomical pieces of men, and then vice versa for both sexes. All of this is really just in vogue to complain about men writing compared to women writing, which is unfair because there are bad writers and good writers in both sexes. So again, the real advice here is don't worry about it. Just write them as characters, and then think about if their sex matters in a given scene, start bringing that into play. But you don't have to have experienced things from someone else's perspective to write about them, because I think this gets to a bigger issue. I, as a man, have not experienced life as a woman, and a woman has not experienced life as a man. However, I, as an American, have not experienced life as a British person, and a British person hasn't experienced life as an American. So there are different lenses all the time from our different places here on Earth. So you really can't get too hung up on, well, what if I don't know how to write from this person's perspective? Because you just got to figure it out. You just got to kind of experiment and see what works. And then as it comes down to, in most cases, you have to get reader feedback to tell you if what you're doing is working. All right, so now I'm going to go through a lightning round of just the titles of these questions and give some really quick answers. How do I transition to a flashback and end that flashback? You start the flashback and then you end the flashback. Do you sometimes feel jealous or annoyed at your own characters? No, because they're not real. Is it better to write for an audience or for yourself? It depends on your goal. If you're writing for fun, write for yourself. If you're writing to be published, write for yourself, but then also get concerned with what an audience wants after you are satisfied with the story that you've written for yourself. How to come up with decent but fake explanations for strange occurrences in your story. You sit down and think about them. Struggling to write my villain. Any help? No, because I don't know what the villain is and I don't know what the story's about. How do you know if a plot point or a part of your story is cringy or too outlandish? You don't. You have to get reader feedback. So don't worry about it, finish your story, then let somebody read it, then get feedback. How do I world build, and what is the best type of world building? Very carefully, and there's no one answer for this. Is there any chance that my draft story is a copy of any other story/YA book? Yes, absolutely. It probably is. Don't worry about it, just keep writing. Writing a novel, how would you write a manipulative character? With my fingers on the keyboard. Is it bad to have 2 scenes in one chapter? No. Have as many scenes as you want in a chapter. A book can be no chapters. Why is this even a question? Will this idea for my hell-based story cause offense to marginalized groups? I know questions like this are generally well-meaning, but what you need to understand is that marginalized groups are people, just like anybody else. People, broadly speaking, are capable of being offended. You will always find somebody who is offended by something. I can guarantee someone right now is offended that the sun is shining or that the air is breathable, depending on where you are. So my actual answer here is don't worry about it. don't worry about causing offense because everyone's taste is different, and you're gonna find people who like what you've written, you're gonna find people who are offended by what you've written. Stop worrying about it. I have thought about writing infinite character crossovers, and my question is, can I? Yes. Is my magic system sufficient enough for a full story? No? Probably not. A magic system does not make a story. Plots, setting, characters, themes, those things make a story. The magic system is part of that, but a magic system on its own does not make a story. Also, I don't even know what the magic system is. This post didn't even explain it. Fictional and real locations. Can you mix the two? Have you ever heard of portal fantasy? Have you ever heard of hidden world fantasy? Urban fantasy? There are a lot of examples of the real world and fictional worlds being mixed. And once again, you do you. You don't need permission to mix the two. All right, I think that's enough torture for today. To wrap this all together, I will obviously point out that it is completely normal to feel some measure of insecurity about your writing, even when you've been doing it for a while. However, writing a few pages, then running off to Reddit to make sure what you're doing is okay is a terrible idea. Likewise, writing a couple pages and then seeking feedback from internet strangers isn't helpful because then you get stuck in a loop of revising a tiny amount of writing rather than continuing to make progress. The bottom line is that you don't need anyone's permission to write anything. If you want to write about a topic, do it. If you never intend to publish and you're just writing for yourself, then what are you even worried about to begin with? If you do intend to publish, then yes, you'll have to take into account at some point what an audience might like, but as I've already said, tastes change from person to person and from genre to genre. So what offends one person might be completely fine to another. More importantly, you can't know how people will react to your story until you've actually written your story. Needless to say, if you are someone who makes these kinds of posts, my advice is to simply stop. You're only going to yield a handful of answers at most, and more often than not, those answers will actually be very similar to what I've said here. More importantly, always remember that your writing should be for you first. Everyone else's tastes are secondary. But I think that is enough for today. Thanks for stopping by. I hope you enjoyed my possibly incoherent ranting and seeing me torture myself by having to read through some of these questions. And I know I came off as really snarky today, but sometimes these questions warrant a snarky response. But if you like this video, please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Leave a comment below if you have some silly questions for which you would like some snarky feedback. As always, I hope that you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you here in the next video.